So this morning we have Tracy apps. We're going to be, I'll give you a little information about Tracy. Tracy's been creating the web for over 20 years and solving user experience challenges well before the term UX was the big thing. She currently owns and operates Tracy Apps Design, a full-service creative agency based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Tracy's client list is just as eclectic as she is, ranging from large corporations like Kohl's and GE Healthcare, to colleges, to nonprofits, small businesses, and even a fiddler. Many times her approach is non-traditional, but always focused on pushing design and user experience to higher levels. She ties her own bow ties and could probably deadlift you. I introduce you to Tracy Apps.
Thank you, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Morning. Congratulations, you made it to the morning session. So this is a talk about UX and diversity. We're going to dive right in, but before we start, let's all get on the same page when we're talking about diversity within UX. So, of course, we start with the Google, and let's see what the Google can say for us. Basically, it says the state of being diverse. Thanks, Google. That doesn't help. But if we look a little bit further, we get this definition. This is a little bit more standard of what we think about when we think about diversity. So we think about different national origin. Now, side note, how many people, when you saw this at first, thought, well, that's upside down? Who says that north is up and the world is round, so why does the United States always show up in the most prominent position above all the other countries? Just a spoiler that's about some bias, which we'll talk more about later. We talk about shades of melanin, right? Different colors, which is another place where bias is detrimental in product design sometimes. Again, we'll talk more about that later. We think about difference in religion, especially when it comes to some of the outwardly present things like places of worship, types of worship, and dress. And then we have the LGBTQ, I don't know, we keep adding more letters, so I just like to call it the beautiful, wonderful rainbow alphabet soup. Well, although I suppose it's more like a Cobb salad. No, jambalaya. I like jambalaya. So, because you can see each of the ingredients, they're their own thing, but they come together in this amazing meal, and now I'm hungry. Okay. So we think about that kind of as a standard definition there. But with UX, I think there's some key things that are missing here. So this etc., we're going to dive in a little bit more on some things that I think is very important. One, gender. Gender is very complex and doesn't always get the attention that it deserves. So I don't know if you've seen something like this, some sort of a cartoon, or gender unicorn, or genderbread person, all that kind of thing, where it kind of goes through some of the different things and different pieces that what we kind of simplify down into this gender binary is really much more complex than that. And each of these arrows is independent of each other. So it's one of those things where you can't assume anything. But one of the most important things, even if you don't remember any of these other pieces of this gender spectrum, just knowing that the gender is not a binary. Because think about how many products, websites, and services that they ask for a gender and they give you the choice of male and female. So my friends that don't identify with either, that's pretty alienating. Like, there's no place for me here. So, and another thing to note is that the gender identity and gender expression are not necessarily connected. So it's best just not to assume and ask for people's preferred pronouns, or just call them by the name that they gave you. So age and generation. I know people think about this as like young people versus old people, or millennials versus, well, anyone, in a technical level, like technical ability. But my 94-year-old grandmother can download photos and print them that I email her better than my Gen Z college students. So it's not about that. But it is about the things that shape our viewpoints, the things that we have lived through as different generations. So it's something that, like, what we have seen or not seen shapes the way that we view and navigate the world. So, for example, I was teaching a class at UW-Milwaukee a couple years ago, and I graduated from UW-Milwaukee many years before. And I was telling the story because I lived in the dorms for a while, and I said, so I lived in the dorms, and there was this, I was in temporary housing, and it was, the phone number was one number off of the county jail's phone number. So we got calls all through the night asking if so-and-so was in custody. And you know what my students were shocked about? You had phones in the dorms? And I was like, that's what you got from the story? But it makes sense. Like, well, there's no phones now. Everyone has their own. But, you know, on the flip side, I remember going through a lot of tornado drills, not one active shooter drill like they have. So, and we have different levels or varying levels of physical and or cognitive abilities. Notice I didn't say disabled or a disability. We'll talk more about that later. And finally, one I think that is one of the most overlooked things of diversity when it talks about mental illness. Mental illness, emotional, sensory disorders, all of these are very, very common in the world. And think about the devices we use and how much they affect us personally. So by not considering things like this, I think it's at a huge detriment of, and why we have so much, like, social media addiction and those kinds of things that really affect us in a negative way. So in short, really, diversity is about inclusion and belonging. And especially us who are creating products, creating web, all of these things, it requires us to constantly, consistently notice and question why we are making the decisions we're making. And always bringing back, like, this, shining this spotlight on our own biases, which we'll talk more about, and question why a lot more. And bring more and more diverse voices to the table. And always keep an eye for that. So where do we start? Let's start with the ABCs. Assumptions, bias, and consequences. So let me tell you a story. So it was a couple years ago, and Facebook started kind of cracking down on their real name policy, requiring that everyone use their real name on Facebook. So they asserted that authentic identity is important to the Facebook experience. Our goal is that every account on Facebook should represent a real person. That's a good goal there. But what did that look like actually in practice? So here's some stories. There's an Ethiopian LGBT activist and leader in the community that would use Facebook to create communities that were safe places for education and community and support for the LGBT community in Ethiopia. Now, in Ethiopia, it's very dangerous to be gay, that it was very common for people to be jailed, beaten, or killed. So he had to, for life or death reasons, use an alias on social media. But he was blocked out of his Facebook account because he wasn't using his real name. Another example, in Egypt, there's stories where police will actually use things like Facebook and dating apps to trap LGBT individuals and jail them. And pretty dangerous situation there too. These are just a tiny sampling of some of the consequences that can happen from this. Now, on the flip side, let's meet Shane Creeping Bear. He is of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma. He and many Native Americans, including Dana Lonehill of the Lakota tribe, they suddenly found themselves locked out of their Facebook accounts, claiming that Facebook said that their names did not meet the standards, the Facebook standards, because their names didn't fit what they thought was the requirements, right? And not only the Native American community, but other cultures where, like, let's say you don't have last names in the culture. Well, now you can't create a Facebook account because they don't fit the standard or the norm. So it really forced a lot of people into this lengthy verification process where they had to send them 3 forms of verification of their identity, and they had to wait for a Facebook employee to personally approve of their name. Whoops. So, well, now, Facebook's intention of enforcing this rule was all positive. It was meant to combat the issue of bullying, hate speech, and spam accounts, right? Because, if our identities are attached to our actions, apparently it's supposed to have more accountability, right? But that assumes 2 things. That, 1, all the users had the privilege of safety in their country, city, or family. And 2, that they, as in the Facebook development team, would possibly be able to create a system that was completely non-biased in order to enforce the rule. So now both of these assumptions were incorrect, and you can see that the consequence can be life or death. Accessibility. Now, it wouldn't be a talk, Tracy App's talk, without some accessibility talk here. So now, accessibility. We usually we hear accessibility in conjunction with the word disability or disabled. Like I said earlier, we don't like this word because it just creates this otherization, which I'm excited to see how they spell that because I made that word up. But it kind of separates us. It's like, oh, well, I'm not disabled. That's a small group over here. And that just makes sad Keanu sad. Makes me sad, too. But instead, I propose we reframe our thinking, really, and talk about this as different levels of ability. Because that includes all of us. Because, spoiler alert, accessibility is for all of us. So, example. Let's say you're an able-bodied individual. You have full vision. You can communicate. You can hear everything. You are not limited by a cognitive or physical disability or ability, a level of ability there. You have all 10 fingers, and you have a smartphone that has a data plan that you can afford and all of these things, right? You may be even technical savvy. Well, now you go and take your recreational soccer game and you break your good arm and someone runs over your other hands with their cleats. Now, I couldn't find a good photo, so please enjoy this ridiculous stock photo that I purchased just for you all. You're welcome. I mean, I don't know if you break your foot that you then put your foot on your desk when you're using your computer, but whatever. But now you're in bandages and a cast, and now you're trying to find the internet and to find a doctor for some follow-up visits or to look for some remedy for all the pain. Well, now you're struggling to use technology like you normally do. So I think you'd be very appreciative for those companies that don't treat accessibility as just an afterthought, but actually keep it very in the forefront in the development. So, usability. We talk about usability. Usability is like one and the same. It's what we talk about with user experience, right? So, I'll pose a question to you. Is it possible to have usability without accessibility? Well, I will challenge anyone that wants to, but I absolutely say no. I think they are literally one and the same. So, and just a side note that triple equals in development world, it's like instead of like a regular dare, it's like a triple dog dare. It means really, really, really equal. So not only is usability and accessibility just one and the same, there's a strong link between products that are more accessible and usable and diverse teams. So, and that would make sense, right? So now speaking of diverse teams, there's a huge reason why we need to have some of these on our teams and make sure to kind of keep an eye on this. One of the big things is cognitive bias. So I'm going to look a little bit into this because this is a big thing. So what is cognitive bias? Well, this is actually kind of an umbrella term here. This is the way our brain processes information. So it's the way we create our own subject reality based on the input that we receive. So if you think of it, there's so much that our brain is inundated with every time. So they're not necessarily a bad thing because it's a shortcut of like how to not get eaten by a bear. So I don't have to think through all of these things. I act automatically. That is an example of a cognitive bias. So now, while they're not all bad, they do control our decisions and influence and the way we act, everything. So these biases, there's some examples, include something like the anchoring bias, where we rely too heavily on the first bit of information that we receive. There's the optimism bias, where we inflate the good and kind of just diminish the bad. We've got the social default bias. If we don't know what to do, we copy what other people do. And then the sunk cost effect, too, is another example where the more effort we put in, the more money we put in that house or something, the less and less likely we're going to be logical and reasonable about like letting go of that. And these are from a website that I recommend you check out, cogload.com. It's really amazing little tidbits of information and fascinating to read through. And those are in the slides. So but there's a lot of them. So there's a test on this afterwards. Just kidding. So this is a chart of all different cognitive biases. I encourage you, I made a short link and I put them in the slides, which I will tweet out later. I encourage you to take a look at this, and it's fascinating. It'll explain a lot about, that's why I think that way. That's why I made that decision. Oh, that's interesting. I want to point out one that is kind of really key, especially in user experience, is the unconscious bias or implicit bias. So this cognitive bias is where we make sense of the world by we categorize things. We put things in groups. So that includes people and groups of people. And it's one of those things that happens in our subconscious mind. So we all do it. Now, one thing, a big trick within UX is we all have this. But this is why we always ask the question, why? Okay, why? And to dig down and to figure out, I'm being affected by this, this implicit or unconscious bias. So there's some examples where this creates a big disconnect if that's not questioned. So did you know 40 years ago that color film was designed to work perfectly with white skin and not dark skin? These are Shirley cards. These were used as the standard. They would test colors against these, color correct against these cards. And not only the film, but the sensors were not made to pick up and to distinguish, well, dark skin. And this isn't just something that's from long ago. There's examples now where sensors won't recognize dark skin, including things in soap dispensers, fitness trackers. There's all of these things that were not tested well, definitely because of no diversity is a huge factor in this. And another example, there was a Chinese man in New Zealand who was not able to get his passport because online he kept getting the error, the user's eyes are closed. So these are examples of systems that they're being programmed but not being programmed for diversity. And I'm no expert, but I'm 99% sure that these teams that created, designed, produced, and tested did not include the diversity needed in order to avoid things like this. Another example, even larger companies that have more diversity. This is the family emojis from Facebook. Do you see something missing here? Well, not only is there the kind of gag-worthy blue and pink used to distinguish between the gender binary, which, by the way, in biblical times it was switched, just, you know. But other than that, but what about biracial families? Yes, that's a lot of different options. Windows says it's 52,000, but they did a pretty good job of including a lot of these. So this is actually in the Windows release. Their emojis, their family emojis are much closer to the mark. Okay, how many people thinking, no, all right, well, this is big, okay, but how am I going to do anything? Well, I'm not a technology creator. I don't do these things. Or I don't even work in technology. I don't know if I can influence these things. Well, nope. This is something that applies to everything, everyone, and everything, and every industry. So if we have some like big, epic, inspirational, pivotal film music score, no, don't have any of that. But basically, it comes down to show up, speak up, and make room. So as UX designers, when we create products, this means being in those planning meetings. It means speaking up and kind of almost being like that toddler asking why, but why, but why, but why? You know, because remember that you're not your users, so you always want to kind of keep diving deeper down. And for those that don't have part in creating like some sort of product, make your voice heard through user testing. Even if you find a problem, you see an issue with some sort of product, and you think, well, but I'm the only one that this affects. You're not. Then make the product owner or designers aware of those issues. So, I know what you're thinking, but diversity only exists in these cheesy stock photos. There's some truth to that, especially in technology. That's nothing new and pretty evident that there's not the diversity that we need in, well, most industries, but especially the tech industry. So companies just throw tons of money in order to create diversity. And they use stock photos like this to say, look at us, we're so diverse, we're so open, we're so wonderful, or to attract more diversity. But has it worked? No, not at all. So why? Well, diversity is hard. And why is that? It really includes, instead of not just using a stock photo, it requires real change. It forces us to kind of ask why on a lot of different things. So we need to change our environment. So accessibility, is your workspace accessible for those that have limited ability to physical abilities? Or ADD? How about for those that pray multiple times a day? Language. Now, you have to change the language, not meaning like, okay, now we learn Portuguese and we speak that, but look at the language and the words that you use within the company on your marketing materials. Are there inside jokes or things that are tailored to a certain demographic and could be offensive to others? Trying to avoid use like idioms that could have negative connotation, like whitelist and blacklist. For thinking like that subconsciously connects white with good and black with bad. So being aware of those things, because those are in the company culture and you don't even notice. But it creates a place that is not welcome for diversity. Systems and processes. Again, so why are the rules at your workplace or in the industry or whatever on your, whatever situation you're in? Those processes, who do they benefit? Who were they created by? Who do they not benefit? Who do they leave out? So one thing, like a typical workday might be great for some people, but it is really not possible for others. What do you define as good and desired and valued? Who defines that in like an employee, in a work, or in anything? So, and these rules, as a kind of a spoiler, unconscious bias has a big part in the creating of these rules and systems. And changing attitudes. So, like I said, we've noticed there's a real big lack of diversity within the tech industry. Now, like I said, we put lots of money into this, but it hasn't gotten any better. But why? Well, the lack of diversity isn't a technical problem, and tech companies solve problems with technology. But lack of diversity is a people problem. It's all about these things like the environment, language, all of those aren't technical issues. Those are people things. So really, it comes down to empathy. So empathy, especially you hear a lot of that in user experience. So let's look at this real quick. Empathy. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. This sounds like pretty much the crux of what user experience is, right? Everything that a user experience person does is in order to find out and understand the user much better, because we are not our user. There's a talk on that I did, so you can look that up later. But user testing, user research, analyzing all the data, all of that stuff is to do this. So empathy is pretty much needed in UX. And I hope from this talk you understand that diversity is crucial for user experience. Well, you know what? There's a direct link between empathy and diversity. Empathy fosters diversity, and diversity fosters empathy. There's studies that show, because we all have the unconscious bias, but they show that if you spend more time just living along people that look different than you, take any one of those things that we talked about in diversity. If you take yourself out of your normal little bubble and kind of really spend time with another, it's shown that, well, while it can't completely change our unconscious bias, it does tweak it and really makes us question why we jump to some conclusions and why we decide on certain things. It much as easy. It shines that light on, well, but why? And really, let's think about it. Like, this is everything in life, too, right? Because this isn't just a UX problem. So I know you came for diversity in UX, but you're getting to talk about diversity in life, diversity in every industry, because it's so crucial. So if we focused on really living into this, into empathy and diversity, and being conscious about that in our lives, that's going to make a huge difference in the world or wherever you are, in whatever industry you are, whatever position you are in. That's going to make a big difference. And it kind of looks like a bow tie. And, you know, bow ties are cool. Thank you. Any questions?
No questions for Tracy?
Yes.
There is. I'll just...
So I haven't really dove that much into Gutenberg, but I know one of the big issues with it on the admin side especially is accessibility. And I know this is a talk about diversity, but it sounds like it's everything. So I wanted to know what your thoughts on that were.
Yeah.
Specifically the admin side in Gutenberg and accessibility, usability, diversity, however we want to approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Gutenberg, I was like, all right, no, I'm gonna, because I noticed absolutely there's way too much that relies on the user having more full abilities, like being able to use a mouse and even though but I'm like, all right, I'm gonna keep an open mind. I'm gonna try, and I was using it for a site just last week actually. And I was even having problems like deleting some of the things and stuff like that. I'm like, so I do think it needs some work, a lot of work within the accessibility. I heard that there is a fundraising campaign to do a full accessibility audit on it, which is really good news because that means that the developers and the people at Automatic are really committed to like, okay, yeah, we see there is an issue here. But we're going to really put our money there and fix it. So I do think there are some big issues with the accessibility, but I'm hopeful that those will be fixed, hopefully very soon. So. Yeah.
Other questions for Tracy? I'll get over there as quickly as I can. No? One in the back. Did I see a hand go up? I did.
I just wanted to make a comment about the diversity of women in the tech world. So I got my computer science degree in 1983. About 30% of my colleagues were female then. And we were fine. I had no problems with my male colleagues, with being a coder, with being in the tech world. I worked in the field for about 10 years, and then I became a stay-at-home mom for 16 years. Completely got out of it, like wasn't paying any attention to what was going on. And then when I came back into it, and I found out what had happened, I was appalled. And so this idea, I liked what you said about that this is a people problem, because women coders are amazing. Like, we are really, really good at it. When I was in school, my male, peers were coming to the women for help because we were good at it. So this idea that women can't code is completely invented. And you can probably tell by my shaking voice that it's a really big issue for me. It really makes me mad that women have been pushed out of this field that we should be in.
Absolutely.
And so I just appreciate your talking about it, and I try to talk about this whenever I'm at conferences like this, because a lot of newer people in the field don't know this history, don't know the fact that women were very strongly in this field, very well accepted, and somehow or another got pushed out. And it just infuriates me.
Yeah. Well, so. the first computers were women that, we wouldn't be to the moon, right? The woman that led the team and got us got NASA, got us to the moon. It's very, yep.
And that's actually where I was working.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. I want to talk to you more. That sounds fascinating. I love it. That's so great. Thank you for your comment.
Other questions? There is one. Just give me a sec.
Hi, I'm a design educator here locally, and what I would want to know is, I guess from the entrepreneurial side, when you take on a new client or somebody comes to you and asks you to help them out, where do you start in educating the client on how to be inclusive?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I mean,
So-
especially coming from, I guess, somebody in this so-called minority class, and they assume, they have assumptions of who you are and what you do.
Yeah.
So how do you?
Well, honestly, I want to say it was probably my parents. Love them. They're very supportive. But they said something like, oh, well, you need to, tone down yourself to get clients. Or, no one's going to hire you like that. So my way of rebelling is doing exactly the opposite. And I don't have a business Twitter account. I have my own account that I rant about things. I talk about gay things. I talk about all of these things. So one, if a client's working with me, they're going to see that. I don't hide that. And I wear a bow tie every day. And it's interesting because some people just don't know how to take me. It's like doesn't compute, and so I get this kind of tilt, and then they treat me like a guy. It's interesting, but it's interesting. So just even being very visible is one piece of it. When most of my clients, it's usually something about web design or some sort of marketing or a product that I'm helping with, the user experience of that. And in that case, I do educate a little bit, but I mostly, sometimes if the client isn't really kind of open to it, sometimes it's a matter of framing it in a way that they find value of that. So talking about, always bringing it back to the bottom line, because business people, this is in order to include a much larger demographic, and maybe not the nuances behind it, but that they know that this is why that they're doing it, and it also helps prevent them from saying, well, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do accessibility testing. Well, no, but did you know good accessibility helps you with the Google? You can be on the first page of Google. Those kinds of things, framing it in a way of something that they're they find very important. And that really helps with that. So, thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Doesn't look like it. Tracy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
get started here. T-shirt and swag pickup by 3 p.m. in the back of a hallway track. This is also probably the time if you're going to swap out T-shirts for sizes or whatever. You want to get up there before 3 so that things work for you. Let's see. The WordPress gear store is going to be closing by 4 p.m. So get there before then to get all your WordPress gear with all your emblems, etc. I'm not sure if this is still true, but I'll throw it out there anyway. In the Lost and Found, there is a lost cell phone. So if anybody is missing a cell phone, don't know how you would not know that you were missing a cell phone. But if you're missing a cell phone, it may be up in Lost and Found. So go up and take a look. I wanted to remind everybody that WordCamp is a nut-free environment. In many, many ways, we do actually have attendees who have serious nut allergies, airborne nut allergies. So if you're carrying any kind of nut with you, please keep it in a sealed bag, in your bag. Very important. These people are incredibly allergic, and that includes anything with nuts, including things like candy bars. So it's an important thing, big health thing for them. So if you would. We're going to get going here in just a few minutes.
Settings real quick, make sure we set it to the audio up. Headphone jack. External headphones, yep, that should be what we do. If you could play something really quick, and I'm just going to run up and give you a thumbs up that I hear it.
Please make sure it's for an extra monitor. Just because I saw it present note on that. No, it's working.
No, but the audio is not working. The audio is not working. Audio.
We're going to get started. On stage coming to us is Dr. Molly Wright-Steenson. Her topic today, her talk, is called Beyond the Trolley Problem. I'll let her give a few words about herself. Off we go. Thank you, Molly.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thrilled to be here, and this is my first word camp, but I'm a longtime user and a longtime friend of Matt Mullenweg and much of the team, so it's great to be here. I'm a design professor. I'm a professor of ethics and computational technologies, and I'm also the Senior Associate Dean for Research at Carnegie Mellon University. And questions about ethics are very, very big there. In fact, I think in the last year, ethics has been a booming topic in tech, and it might be something that you've heard about. Perhaps it's one reason you're here. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what the trolley problem is. And the trolley problem is this. Is anyone familiar with it? Who here has heard of the trolley problem? Okay. So for those of you not familiar, it goes like this. You are that guy operating a switch, and there's a trolley heading down the track. And if you do nothing, your trolley is going to run into 5 people and kill them. But if you throw the switch, you're going to move the trolley onto a different spur, and you will not kill the 5 people. You'll kill 1 person instead. So what's the right thing to do? What do you do? Who lets the trolley go? And by doing nothing, kill 5 people. Is there anyone who would do that? It's kind of hard, right? Who's going to do the 1 person? Who feels good about that choice? Nobody. So again, the question of what the right thing to do is a big concern. And this particular question was originally formulated by 2 female philosophers, first by Philippa Foot in 1967, and then it was augmented by a woman named Judith Jarvis Thomson, who is a professor of philosophy at MIT. And Judith Jarvis Thomson made it more difficult. She also made a trolley problem situation where you can stop the trolley by throwing a large man off of a bridge. She also points out things like, she does other versions of it, like a brilliant transplant surgeon has 5 patients, each in need of a different organ, each of whom will die without that organ. Unfortunately, there are no organs available to perform any of these 5 transplant operations. But a healthy young traveler just passing through the city the doctor works in comes in for a routine checkup. In the course of doing the checkup, the doctor discovers that his organs are compatible with all 5 of his dying patients. Suppose further that the young man were to disappear. No one would suspect the doctor. Do you support the morality of the doctor to kill the tourist and provide his healthy organs to the 5 dying people and save their lives? What do you think? No. So we use these questions to talk about the intractability of some of the decisions that we're making around technology and around trade-offs in life and death. Is anyone here a fan of The Good Place? And those of you who know the trolley problem, is it because you know it because of The Good Place? Yeah. It's a particularly funny, great episode. If you're not familiar with this TV show, it's a wonderful TV show about ethics, starring Ted Danson as the architect. It also turns out that there are trolley problem memes. They started out on 4chan. There's a Facebook group full of trolley problem memes. You see memes like this. There's nothing you can do to save the people. However, the lever you stand next to controls music playing from the boombox attached to the trolley. If you pull it to your left, it plays All Star by Smash Mouth. But if you pull it to your right, it plays any random song. You can only pull it once, and if you don't pull it, it defaults to All Star. And you cannot kill yourself. There's a trolley problem mug, trolley problem guy mug. If I could find this, I would be super delighted. And I want to point out that we also talk about things. Actually, I'm gonna jump back to this. These are slightly out of order, so I'm going to come back to that in a second. This is one of my favorite things in the world. It's a 2-year-old's answer to the trolley problem. Ready?
Uh-oh, Nicholas. This train is going to crash into these 5 people. Should we move the train to go this way, or should we let it go that way? Which way should the train go?
You may not have heard it because you were laughing, but he's saying, uh-oh. So we use the trolley problem as a way to talk about these ethical conundrums. And we use another one, too. We use Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. He first wrote these in 1942, really long time ago. There are 3 laws. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Law number 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So why do we talk about the trolley problem so much these days? And why do we think about the robots? It's because the trolley problem is a question of a number of things. It's a way that we can think about trade-offs and accountability and control and design when we're talking about artificial intelligence and digital and computational systems. So we could talk about the trolley problem, or we could talk about the Uber hitting a pedestrian problem. And you're probably familiar with this, that back in March, in Tempe, Arizona, an Uber hit a pedestrian. And a self-driving car hit a pedestrian and killed her. And the driver, the human operator of that vehicle, was sitting in the driver's seat, had apparently been watching The View when the crash happened and when the pedestrian died. And it's a really problematic situation because in some ways she's held responsible for situations that were beyond her control, right? It's a self-driving vehicle. She wasn't involved in the design of that vehicle. She wasn't involved in the design of Uber's decisions. Excuse me. And in that setting, it's a complicated set of factors. One of the things that Uber had done was disabled the Volvo's self-braking technologies in favor of their own technology. And so it's a complicated situation. Yesterday, Waymo's self-driving taxis have launched in Phoenix, Arizona, and Phoenix is making a lot of trade-offs and putting a lot of self-driving vehicles on the street. My city, Pittsburgh, has lots of self-driving vehicles because we are the center of autonomous vehicle development just up the street from my house. And MC Eilish, Madeline Eilish, refers to these situations like the Uber crash as moral crumple zones, where humans are held responsible and held accountable for decisions they didn't make, right? She describes it as where people get caught within ambiguity within systems of distributed control. So it's a question of who gets blamed, the human operator, for design decisions beyond her control. Now, when we talk about self-driving vehicles and the trade-offs, there's a lot of things that the executives of these companies will say. They'll point out things like 40,000 people were killed in car accidents last year, that accidents cost $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion. And congestion is a cost of $305 billion a year. These are numbers that refer to the lost productivity of workers, people sitting in traffic, the cost of transporting goods. I found this kind of interesting. It's a little bit hard to read, but if you take a look, you can see the number of hours you might be spending in congestion here, and how that cost would be, what that cost would be to the driver, and what that cost would be to the city. So it's an expensive thing, and it's a costly thing, and it costs human lives. So these are major questions, and self-driving vehicles will certainly be a part of our future. But there are questions that come up, and there are reasons that we turn to trolley problems to try and figure it out. It's questions of ethics and risk and liability, and also, for that matter, legal code. And a young lawyer named Brian Casey, who is at Stanford as a postdoc, basically, right now, points out that the questions here are these robots, and by this he means self-driving cars, will maximize morality but minimize liability. And it's a complicated set of factors. So it's a question of lawyers. Might get sorted out by insurance people. And I'm a design professor, so I think that it's a question of design. as well as a question of algorithms. So when we're talking about algorithms, we're not talking about something quite so random. We're talking about questions of fairness and accountability and law enforcement, and as we've seen, matters of life and death. We also see different ways that they play out in what we could call embedded governance and code as law. Have you heard about GPS starter devices? So if you are someone who has maybe less than optimal credit and you buy a car, you might have a starter device that will make it so that if you don't submit your payments on time, the car won't start. Or the car will shut down, as it has done for people who are driving down the highway and find their car is stopping them because their payments are late. So these GPS starter interrupt devices are a way to keep people on time. But on the other hand, what these do is they embed law in the objects around us with matters of potentially life or death, right? There's a CBS story about a woman trying to get to her dialysis appointment. She's in kidney failure and her car won't start, or a car gliding to a stop in Las Vegas. So we call this embedded governance. And there are other things too. You might consider this question, for instance. Palantir worked with the city of New Orleans secretly to unleash a predictive policing technology that racially profiled people and sought to kind of prohibit arrests. I also want to point out that questions of facial recognition are a really, really big issue. And if you're familiar with the group AI Now, I'd recommend taking a look at their report. They say some really interesting things about this. But sometimes it plays out in ways that are a little more everyday, like this example. I'm going to point out here that the audio is not exactly going to be tracked right, but I want you to see this nonetheless. It's about how HP computers are racist.
Oh, Desi. This is using the video tracking software.
All right.
Explain.
My coworker Wanda and I are sitting in front of an HP Media Smart computer. State-of-the-art computer, wouldn't you say?
I'd say.
We're using the face tracking software, so it's supposed to follow me as I move. I'm black. I think my blackness is interfering with the computer's ability to follow me. As you can see, I do this, no following. Not really following me. I back up, I get really, really close to try to let the camera recognize me, not happening. Now, my white coworker, Wanda, is about to slide into frame. You will immediately see what I'm talking about. Wanda, if you would, please.
Sure.
Now, as you can see, the camera is panning to show Wanda's face. It's following her around. But as soon as my blackness enters the frame, which I will sneak into the frame. I'm sneaking in, I'm in there.
That's it. It's
and
over.
There we go, it stopped. My hands are here. Wanda, please get back in the frame. Get back in. As soon as white Wanda appears, the camera moves. Black Desi gets in there. Oh, nope. No face recognition anymore, buddy. I'm going on record, and I'm saying it. Hewlett-Packard computers are racist. I said it.
So this is maybe humorous, but also there are hand soap dispensers that don't notice dark skin. There are fitness trackers that don't read through dark skin, and there are cameras that that provide a blink detector. But when an Asian person is photographed, it says you're blinking. So these are all things that are questions of design and questions of algorithm and questions of choice that get built into the objects around us and actually do have a material effect on our lives. Oops.
Oh, Desi.
There we go. And if we want to look more closely at facial recognition, here's something to consider. There are various facial recognition technologies that are in place, and not only do they read faces, but they read emotions and opinions, and they also misread. So in this case, these are 3 members of Congress in a set of mugshots that were fed to facial recognition technology using Amazon's Amazon's particular technology, it misidentified 3 members of Congress, number of members of Congress actually. And so they wrote a letter to Amazon, to Jeff Bezos, saying that this really needs to be considered. But do consider the questions of life and death, and do consider what happens when people are stopped, and the disproportionate number of people of color who are stopped when you consider policing incidents, and you begin to see why things are really problematic. There's also a question of the data that you don't collect. So this is Mimi Onuaha, and she is an artist and designer and writer who writes about uncollected data sets. And she points out that what you don't collect is just as important as what you do, because you can't analyze, you can't parse, you can't subject to machine learning what you don't already collect. What you see here in this file cabinet are her uncollected data sets, and when she puts this in a gallery, she makes it available for you to open up the file drawer and look at the different file folders inside, all of which, of course, are empty. One of the uncollected data sets that she notes is shootings of unarmed African-American men. That actually did begin to be computed, and as a result, change began to be made. She also has done a project, for instance, with Asian actors on Broadway, who pointed out that there were almost no roles for Asians, but they began to collect the data, and once the data had been collected, there were newer roles and more roles. They were able to argue for themselves and for more equitable casting on Broadway. And a lot of these things take place within what we call the black box, right? We don't get to see what's there. We can't see inside. We can't see how these decisions are made. In fact, the algorithms can't even explain to us how the decisions get made, right? And even if they could, when we talk about maybe we just need to make them transparent, that doesn't really work. Because transparency, if you're completely open and transparent about what's going on, you might be harmful. You might make things more confusing. You might make false binaries, apples to oranges, right? Compare things that shouldn't be there. And there are technical and temporal limitations of what our technology does and how long we can use these technologies in time and space, right? So being transparent isn't really what it is, isn't really what it's about. And Mike Annany and Kate Crawford, Mike is a professor at USC Annenberg, and Kate Crawford is the head of AI Now, point out that what you really need to do is not make things transparent, but make it so people can interpret what algorithms are doing, because interpretation is different than transparency. And I want to point out here that these are questions of culture. They're the questions of the companies that we all work at, the institutions that we all work at. And what Kate Crawford, Meredith Whitaker, and the staff at AI Now write is that just as many AI technologies are black boxes, so are the industrial cultures that create them. So is Amazon. So is Google. And you start seeing ways that this might actually change, right? Here are just a couple of examples of recent news stories. This story that says, can an algorithm tell when kids are in danger, is something that's taking place in my county, in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County. It's the Allegheny Family Screening Tool, and it's an algorithm that tries to determine if a child is likely to be removed from their family within the next 2 years if a complaint is called in to the Allegheny Department of Health and Human Services. Now, the data that this is based on comes from 100 different public sources, but those public sources may be biased, right? They may be disproportionately collecting the data of lower class families and people of color. And so the problem here is that biased data will make a biased output. But on the other hand, something that protects children is, excuse me, better than nothing, right? So the head of the Department of Health and Human Services is having these algorithms audited and working together with AI Now and a number of other organizations to make sure that what they're doing is okay, or at least somewhat better. And it's hard. There isn't a good answer, right? Finally, apparently, the Defense Innovation Board is going to look at the ethics of AI in war. If you look at the history of artificial intelligence, it's completely funded by the Department of Defense. it has always been the case. And so it's really good that ethics might make a start there. When your boss is an algorithm talks about, it's an excerpt of a book called Uberland that just came out this fall. MIT is launching a college that's going to kind of do digital humanities at scale, AI, and the humanities across the campus as a way to understand things. And Amazon has scrapped their resume tool that was biased against women. It had begun so much to bias against women that even traditional women's colleges had been locked out. And these are ways to kind of move people through the pipeline and deal with the large scale of resumes. So I like this quote that Brian Casey has about trolley problems. He said that trolley-like problems are not mere philosophical curiosities. Those designing the decision-making systems cannot simply shrug their shoulders. Rather, they must design in advance how their systems will respond when life and limb are on the line. And I want to point out that this involves everybody in this room. So what do we do? Paul Virilio in 1999 pointed out that all of these questions we have kind of are part and parcel with the technologies. When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. And when you invent electricity, you invent electrocution. Every technology carries its own negativity, which is invented at the same time as technical progress. And I want to point out that these ethical problems are not new. I mean, we know that the trolley problem was coined in about 1967. But AI isn't new either, although we act like it is. I collect these. AI is the new black, UI, next digital frontier, oops, space race. AI is the new electricity. AI is dreaming up all kinds of new video games. I highlighted the word new here, and 6 times on one screen alone, although one of those is New York, so it doesn't count. Google's AI is a new paradigm that unites humans and machines. And in this particularly sexist example, I'm apparently the new AI. This says something about she'll never ghost you, never charge you more for a logo, et cetera, et cetera. But AI isn't the new anything because it's not new. The term was actually coined in 1955, right, by John McCarthy, who said, making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by man. If you ever have heard of human-computer symbiosis, the idea of humans and computers working very closely together in close partnership, that idea is from 1960, from a man named J.C.R. Licklider, who put in place a lot of the agenda for artificial intelligence research between 1960 and his death in 1990. And then, of course, Marvin Minsky in 1961 said that we're on the threshold of an era that will be strongly influenced and quite possibly dominated by intelligent problem-solving machines. Which is why it gives me pause when I see someone like this describing a new era of artificial intelligence in 2016. It isn't that new. And we still don't have good ways of talking about it, right? So this is why we resort to trolley problems or cliches, things like this. I like calling this woman Cyborg Lady. Am I right that that's jQuery? Is this the future? Here, ready? Here she is. Brits fear the AI future. Here she is again, IBM Watson. She works for IBM. The ingredient brand helping inform the purposeful business of tomorrow. And she works at IKEA as well. Artificial intelligence embedded in furniture, IKEA is considering. So we turn to these cliches and these examples to talk about AI because we don't understand it. If you do a Google image search, this is what comes up. You see images like that, the grid over the face, cyborg man beholding his hand. And one of my students did an Adobe color pull and pulled the color palette, And he pointed out that these colors and shapes are quite familiar when he thinks of AI. These are the colors that come up. And what do they tell us? They tell us cold, logical, rational, not friendly, not curious, and not open, not interpretable. So again, it's that question of the black box. And it's hard to communicate about AI because communicating it means understanding it. So this is why we turn to cliches. This is why we turn to trolley problems. I like what Eric Johnson had to say about the movie Minority Report, one of these cliches that we turn to. It's really, really hard to talk about digital reality tech, right? He says these fields are full of jargon, inconsistent in practice, and difficult to grok or understand if you haven't seen all the latest demo. Pop culture is a shortcut to a common ideal, a shared vision. But this still gives me pause when I see images like this coming up when I type in artificial intelligence on Google, and this is what comes up on the Google page. I don't think that picture really helps. So it's the black box. And that's why we resort to metaphors and cliches and use the trolley problem. I'm not sure this picture helps either, but it makes me smile. In 1945, Kenneth Burke said this about metaphors, that metaphor is a device for seeing something in terms of something else. It brings out the thisness of a that and a thatness of a this. It's nice, right? The thisness of a that. And we also talk, this is a little bit wordier, but stick with me here for a minute. Along the philosophical fringes of science, we may find reasons to question basic conceptual structures and to grope for ways to refashion them. Old idioms are bound to fail us here, and only metaphor can begin to limn the new order. If the venture succeeds, the old metaphor may die and be embalmed in a newly literalistic idiom accommodating the changed perspective. But we need to find ways to somehow encapsulate what these changes are, and it isn't very straightforward. And by definition, metaphor is the thing that your English teacher told you was good to use, but cliches are what we're told are bad to use, right? And we talk about a phrase, for instance, or expression regarded as unoriginal or trite. And that's kind of where these different stories and problems, I think, come into play, that they're almost trite in how we use them. But then again, I want to point out that cliches are cliches for a reason, and that they help us to make sense of things, and we use them to quickly explain things. I don't know if you've ever stopped to realize how many sports metaphors you might use in conversation. I'm not a sports person, but they're everywhere, right? Like I realize I've probably got baseball metaphors all over the place, but that's because we all understand them and we can use them to solve things. But I want to suggest a couple of different options for us, for those of us as designers, as front-end people, as writers. I want to point out that humor and uncanniness might be a way forward, that AI might help, that they could help us to understand artificial intelligence better. Is anyone familiar with the uncanny valley? A little bit. So the uncanny valley is basically why we get freaked out when robots are too close to human, right? And in 1970, Masahiro Mori coined this term in an article he wrote and mapped out what this kind of weird eeriness is that we feel about robots and people. And he said we should begin to build an accurate map of the uncanny valley so that through robotics research we can come to understand what makes us human. He also points out, like, what you see here is he was mapping out different kinds of technologies, a toy robot, a prosthetic hand, and there's a point at which it's good, it's good, it's good, whoa, it's really bad. The eeriness is really creepy, but this eeriness is maybe, perhaps he says, essential for us as human beings. Maybe it's a survival technique. I'm a fan of Janelle Shane. Is anyone here familiar with her work? AI Weirdness? So she trains neural nets to do all kinds of things. And I think that not only are these deeply funny, I think they're important and maybe subversive. So she trained them on guinea pig names and came up with a bunch of random guinea pig names via neural nets. So this is Hanger Dan and Princess Pow. As my husband says, any 5-year-old could name a guinea pig Princess Pow but it takes artificial intelligence to name it Hanger Dan. And she also has done things like played with different image recognition technologies to see what the algorithm is doing. And she realized that when she fed the algorithm a lot of pictures of rocky hillsides with grass, the algorithm started hallucinating sheep. It started describing sheep as being there when they weren't. And so then she took some pictures of sheep and colored them orange. That's what you see in the middle. And the algorithm decided those were flowers in a field. And then she decided to really punk the algorithm, and she uploaded a picture of goats in trees. And this is a flock of birds flying in the air, or perhaps a group of giraffes. And what she says about this, I think, is really neat. She says, if life plays by the rules, image recognition works well, but as soon as people or sheep do something unexpected, the algorithms show their weaknesses. And this is a fun setting. This is an amusing kind of setting to look at these things with. But you could just as easily imagine some darker settings about where algorithms fail us. In a second, I'm going to show you the work of Madeline Gannon, who just got her PhD from Carnegie Mellon in architecture. She's a robot whisperer. She has tamed an industrial robot to move and play with people. And she says something I think really important about this. So you'll see her here.
When everything comes together and you're in the space with the robot and you just have a very raw experience with this animal-like machine responding to your every move, all the technical aspects sort of melt away into the background. It's incredibly important to have opportunities and spaces to come in and experiment and misuse these existing technologies.
So this was at the Design Museum in London, and Mimus, the robot, was there for 6 months, and very quickly kids learn how to play with and entertain the robot, and the robot could get bored of people, and then you have to try and capture its attention again. But what she says is really important. She talks about even having the opportunity to learn, play with, and misuse technologies as a way to change what we might think about them. I think that this is a question about reframing the problem. So let's revisit the trolley problem. This is my favorite meme. And we could toss the trolley problem out, but I want to point out that even people who run autonomous vehicle companies understand the use of the trolley problem. As Chris Urmson said, I don't think it's a bad ethical quandary of the trolley problem, but I don't think it's solvable. It forces you to think about it. He said this to my class. I Skyped him into a class that I taught this semester called AI and Culture. And one of my students asked, what about the trolley problem? What should we do? And he thinks it's important as a way to think through things, that there isn't a solution. I want to point out that one of the recommendations that AI now makes is that we need to include other fields other than computer science and engineering, and that this is vital. I would argue that design is vital. I would argue that front-end technology is vital, and writing and philosophy. And indeed, design is necessary, that this isn't just about the ethics of design practice, but the way that we encounter algorithms and AI is a question of design. And there are a couple of things that designers and probably a lot of people in this room who aren't designers might want to do. And as we think about working with AI, there are things that we bring to the table. We do things like understanding people, human needs, and human considerations and translate them for systems. We frame problems. We determine how data can be collected and how it will be used. We can help people to interpret what AI is doing, and we can communicate that and visualize that. And we can support accountability. And we might say, well, is ethics going to slow us down in a world of move fast and break things? I want to point out what my colleague David Danks says, that ethical and efficacious are not antonyms. They don't need to be a trade-off. David asks, do we design for the world we have or the world we want to have? So design is where the rubber meets the road. And I realize that trolley problems are always going to be a conundrum. This one is called Paradox. And that's Oprah. And this is by my house. I go running by Carnegie Robotics. So I'm not totally sure what to think about that. But I put all of this out here to say that trolley problems are problems, they're quandaries, they're conundrums, and there's a role that we have in framing and solving them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Molly? Really?
So I'm not 100% sure how to ask this question, but when you showed the colors, the blue scale, to me, not only does it bring up those ideas of technology, but also of business. And so I think when you're talking about these kind of developments in technology for business, you can't discount the fact that there's a profit model that has to be adhered to, and also that technology is treated like property, like it's like patentable and hidden away. So I guess like my thought in the context of the word camp is that what do you think or fear of the idea of this becoming an open source thing? I mean, I'm obviously like it's gonna happen, but like self-driving cars you could do it in your, we were tinkering around and we created our own self-driving car in our basement, like, which is what we're all kind of doing,
So a couple of things. First, it would be really interesting to compare. You're right, and I hadn't thought about comparing. The AI colors to like IBM, for instance, or Google. And indeed, those blues, like exactly when I say that blue, what color I mean, right? And so there's probably a correlation there as well. I wonder what it might look like if AI was rosy, if it looked like the color palette of the movie Her, as opposed to Minority Report, for instance. And in terms of, one question about self-driving vehicles is that Brian Casey argues that it's going to be sorted out among insurance people and lawyers, that through those settings of risk mitigation, it'll make its way into the public sphere, and that might be ultimately an optimistic and good thing. I don't know if it really is going to be open sourced, but there are all kinds of things that people do to make things autonomous. People have been doing a lot of garage robotics work for a long time. Yikes.
Is there a way to use AI to improve the web experience? Like right now, you can configure like chatbots to communicate with somebody. If somebody lands on your website, there's a response. But is there anything beyond that, like serving content or?
So chatbots have actually been around since the 60s, and they're really hard. They're a really hard problem to solve. I have a master's student right now who's deep in it, and he's banging his head against it. We've been trying to get it right, but conversation is one of these things that it's really easy to get wrong. There are all kinds of different focuses, though, for artificial intelligence research, especially for those of us who build systems on the front end and on the web. I have provided examples of Janelle Shane's work. Her blog, AI Weirdness, talks about playing with neural nets, and she also provides links to examples. Those are a couple of things, and there are countless machine learning oriented classes out there. I'd also recommend Rebecca Fiebrink's work on AI and music, and her tool, the Wekinator, as a way to play with machine learning and music. You're welcome.
One more.
Hi, thank you for your talk. As I think about AI, it seems to me that AI would continually work better with the more information it has. But I also can't help but think that you're going to bump up into privacy issues.
Absolutely.
Because, I don't know if you've heard about this. There was this big law in Europe about GDPR.
And there was a good talk yesterday about it, I heard.
there are parts of the different laws that are butt up against each other. You know, you can't collect certain data, but yet to ensure privacy, you have to collect data to verify who they are. So you can't do one and the other. But it would seem with AI, to be able to know what you need to know, to do what you need to do, you're going to violate somebody's privacy.
And it's a big question. So if you've been reading the news this week about more Facebook revelations and questions, you know, it seems to be an ongoing question with that company. I think one of the biggest questions around Silicon Valley right now is, will the government have to regulate these companies because they can't be trusted to regulate themselves? I might argue that the government may need to step in, although they'll probably do it in some ham-fisted way that shuts off future possibilities. But in terms of privacy, it's really, really vital. My colleague Lori Craner at Carnegie Mellon is a privacy expert, and her work on this area for the last 25 years is really, really useful if you want to dig in and learn a little more. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, and have a great
Molly.
word camp.
Thank you. Hi there, we're going to get started. Our next speaker is Helen Hosandi. She's Director of Open Source Initiatives at the agency 10up and WordPress Core. And she's going to be talking about metaboxes. Metaboxes considered harmful.
Hi, everyone. As you said, my name is Helen Hosandi. I work at this really cool place called 10up. You can also find us upstairs. There's like a Google booth. And so some of us have been up there through the day, today and yesterday. I'm also, I guess, still a lead developer for the WordPress Core software project, which we're all here about, I assume. And I also led the 4.0 and 4.7 releases specifically. All right. So what I want to talk to you today about is the editing experiences that we build for other people, whether that's our clients, ourselves, theme and plugin users, right? A lot of theme and plugin developers out here probably, or really anybody who uses the core WordPress software. This is not a code talk. I have a really hard time giving those, and I think they're better suited for most people for workshops. What this is it's meant to be inspirational and to get you thinking about where we are and where we should go, especially with 5.0 being released two days ago. So broadly, what I hope that you get out of this is not actually that metaboxes themselves are bad and should never be used, nothing sweeping like that, but that we as creators of these experiences for ourselves and for other people, we need to be more thoughtful about when we're doing things that are familiar and when we're prioritizing, our needs as developers and our desire for control, versus really aiming for the best possible experience for our users. Okay, so why did I call this metaboxes considered harmful then? This is definitely like an incendiary talk title. It's to get your attention, clickbait of talk titles. It's a riff on a really, really common trope in our industry, in the tech industry, where a given piece of technology becomes super popular, right? And it becomes popular enough for other people out there who maybe are using it, maybe are not, but they dedicate their time to breaking down the shortcomings of that piece of tech in a blog post, or sometimes a talk, or sometimes like a full-on paper. This considered harmful structure, it actually originated in 1968 with a letter called Go-To Statement Considered Harmful. It's actually something that's extremely funny to think about today in WordPress because hooks are basically just go-tos. All right, so what do I mean when I talk about a metabox? What is this metabox that I'm talking about? At a base level and on a code level, actually, in WordPress, it's these panels that we find all over the WordPress admin. They're a layout component. They can hold anything. Right here, this is your dashboard, sort of by default. I think I hid something. But you get like your at a glance, activity, WordPress events. You can see that my events here are for Costa Rica because that's actually where I live. So these are the things that you see in metaboxes on your dashboard. They typically respond to your preferences, right? You can move them around, and that's retained in your user preferences. You can collapse them, you can hide them, all sorts of things. So that's what a metabox is at a base level. But I think, in common usage and definitely in the context of this talk, what I'm talking about are metaboxes as those panels that we use on the editor screen. There are a lot of them that are built into WordPress. So here you can see like publish, categories and tags, our favorite custom fields metabox. And then, especially for those of us who do development or anybody who works on content on, sort of what we call like enterprise-y or publisher sites, it's very, very common to see custom metaboxes. And there are a lot of really popular plugins out there as well that insert custom metaboxes. So here's an example of a very, very typical, very bare bones, but very typical custom metabox. So this is a real site. It's a real example. This is my husband's website. He's literally on stage at the Guggenheim right now, warming up for Peter and the Wolf. That's what this is. This is an actual listing from his website. So this is, you can see in this meta box, right? We have like start date, end date, time, the venue, URL address, right? Content, title, right? Our usual kind of stuff. So actually, before we continue on with that example, I want to take a step back in time, okay? We're going to go back to 2012. The WordPress customizer is actually just exiting prototyping. Custom metabox frameworks are, I think, about to enter sort of a renaissance period, right? We're talking like CMB2, I think was what we all called it, advanced custom fields. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that. So we're about to enter into a period of high development and high usage for those kinds of plugins and frameworks. Brad and Angelina are about to get married, and Obama's about to get reelected. The Nets have moved to Brooklyn, and the Knicks have Linsanity. I'm really into basketball. Michaela Maroney is not impressed. Sandy happens, Superstorm Sandy happens, and a bunch of us are stranded on Tybee Island after the first WordPress contributor summit. A lot of terrible things also happened that year. Trying to keep this light, not going to get too dark. But basically, 2012 was a while ago, right? It's 6 years ago, right? And we feel like, okay, now in 2018, maybe 2012 wasn't that long ago, but think about how you felt in 2004, right? Like 1998 felt like an eternity ago, totally different era. I mean, like even this year, right? Like the 2018 Olympics, do you even remember that happened, right? That feels like that happened so long ago, so I have no idea how we even measure time at this point. All right, so in 2012, this is what I was working on. This is an example of a site that I was working on. These are actually screenshots from a talk that I gave in like 2013. Like I can't even find the actual site anymore to get current screenshots out of. But this is what I was working on. It was a fashion industry client site, a blog, and they had this highly artwork-driven homepage grid that I needed to build out, right? So it was really cool building out like the HTML and the CSS and having like these little crowns be, before, pseudo elements, right? Like getting into all the nitty gritty of the code of building it out. And then when I got into having to create the editing experience, I had to really think about, how do I make an editing experience for this, right? And for those of you who know me, I have a very certain aesthetic about things. And I couldn't just let it go by and be sort of like the usual that we might think about doing. Okay, so the usual, I think, would be something like this. Very basic meta box on like the homepage edit screen, right? Like you have a static front page and you have a meta box that's just on that edit screen. And you put a bunch of stuff in drop downs, right? We can split it into like left layout, right layout, right? And we can say like it's a 3-up, it's a 4-up, whatever, right? We can pick those from a drop down, and pick your up to 8 posts that show up in that grid, right? Very, very controlled, very easy to understand what it is, right? From like a actually picking stuff out kind of viewpoint. It's fairly easy to understand what's going on, right? And this is very easy to build out. This is actually a screenshot that I made like an hour ago using advanced custom fields. Okay, so that's what we would think of as like a basic example of what a meta box for that might be. For me, however, this was not good enough for a lot of reasons. This is what I ended up building. This was a JavaScript-driven thing, not in Backbone. I'm pretty sure it was just like really terrible jQuery that I don't ever want to see again. But it was a separate options page. So you have to remember, this was before the customizer, right? The customizer came out later that year. So I didn't have that paradigm to refer to. Like I couldn't even think of that as a thing that existed. So for me, I still thought of, right, like a default WordPress experience. And so for me, that was a separate options page because this was a very wide layout and I didn't want to stick it inside a meta box. So we have visual representations of the 1-up to 4-up at the top for each of the sides, and then you get as you change those, it changes live and moves the posts around just based on order, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you get a visual representation of each of the posts that you've selected to go into that grid. So you get a full-size, full preview of what you're going to get on the front, right? And to me, it felt like for a fashion brand especially, this was very, very important to have for them. So this is what picking a post was like, right? We have like an empty slot here, and we're like, okay, I need to stick a post there. Click select post. You get a little, crappy modal that comes up. But with the featured images, remember this is very visually driven, and we need the information, right, for them. They need this. They need to understand like what is maybe the featured image. We'll get into that. That's going to show up in this grid. So you pick one, sticks it in place, okay, and then everything is there for editors to check out. They can check out that featured image, right? That's so important to this layout. They can check out the flow of the text, right? This is something that we really need to think about as we get into like dicing up mockups, right? Like a lot of mockups are for ideal situations, and they don't account for people with long names or a really long post excerpt, right? They don't think about these things. So we have this preview mechanism where the editors can check the text flow, right? Where how long are these things? Do they fit inside these height limited boxes? They are height limited. So they can check their excerpts and decide, is this a good fit for this area? Maybe not. Maybe they can make some different decisions editorially and visually based on this preview that we're giving them. And this is a significantly better experience for them in all ways than sticking something inside of a meta box, right? So now, I know this is called meta boxes considered harmful, but I did actually involve a meta box in service of this site, in service of this grid. The meta box that I built was for something else. It was for multiple featured images, okay? Or more descriptively in this case, we called them post thumbnails because there isn't like a single featured image. There are a bunch of different thumbnails that they could pull from. So because of the way that homepage layout was done, right, you had some really wide landscape images, you had some portrait oriented images, and their archives had square thumbnails, and then they had like really wide landscape featured images like for individual posts. Editors really needed a high level of control over that imagery for all those different situations, right? And remember, this is a fashion brand, right? So if you have a portrait shot of a model and you auto crop it to be wide landscape, not a good idea, right? So that's what we have here for them. So we do still involve meta boxes, but we have to be really mindful about, you know, which type of information we're choosing to manage in which way and when. So that's the meat of this, right? Meta boxes are okay, right? But they can still be harmful. And the reason why I think that they've become harmful is because we've allowed ourselves to kind of settle back into them a little bit too far, right? Back in 2012, before we had those meta box frameworks that would have made it really, really easy for me to spin up, you know, a bunch of fields, right? And before we had the customizer to think about, we really had to get creative about what we were building. Some of that didn't end up so great, right? We have, I think Gary might have mentioned this in his talk yesterday, where we have like very fractured UIs across different plugins, across different themes, right? So not all of the outcomes have been great, but we were being really creative about what we were doing. We were pushing boundaries. We were, you know, ripping our hair out, writing custom things, right? And trying to come up with different patterns that we could use within WordPress because unfortunately, still, WordPress does not provide you with a lot of patterns and reusable pieces and components to use. So we were doing that back in 2012. But I think since then, with sort of like the renaissance of meta boxes and the explosion of like sort of the WordPress development economy, right, we all have a lot to do, right? We're all very busy all the time. We're super busy at 10up all the time, even though I don't even work on client stuff anymore. It's just, you know, I know what everybody's dealing with. So, you know, we started to take kind of shortcuts, and we started to think about ourselves as developers first, rather than thinking about that experience and getting creative with what we're doing. And so we've kind of settled down into using meta boxes for everything. So what's happened in the meantime in WordPress core, right, and where a lot of friction has been in those years in between the developer community, you know, custom development community, and the WordPress core development community, has been that the WordPress admin itself has actually fully embraced visually driven editing, right? Editing and management experiences. The customizer, even the new media library, new. It's not really that new, I guess. We keep calling it that, and it's not new at all. Now with Gutenberg and the new block-based editor in 5.0, right? We've really embraced that in WordPress core, and where, you know, in the meantime, the custom development community has kind of, you know, stayed a little static, I think, and been reluctant to embrace stuff like the customizers. There are definitely people out there who have done really, really cool things for their clients, and, you know, if you go to like talks at like the .com VIP meetups and that sort of thing, people give really cool talks about really cool things that they're doing with these custom, you know, visually driven UIs. But I actually think that they're relatively uncommon, right? This is not the the lowest common denominator for custom development in WordPress. The things that we see in really big agencies are not what people are doing day to day. Okay, so I want to go back to my husband, who is currently pretending to be a cat by way of playing clarinet in Peter and the Wolf today. Yeah, he's going to watch this later and be like, why are you talking about me? Okay, so this editor has been working fine for years. Okay, I built this before I was even at 10up. This is like code from 2010, 2011, when I still worked at a music school as a web developer, but I worked at a music school that I had gone to. And I look at my code now, and it's like, it's so terrible. But it's fine, right? It's fine. It's working. He's happy. I'm happy. Everything's good, right? He can enter stuff, and it shows up on his website. And that's what he really cares about. This is what it looks like an individual event, right? You get like title, a human formatted date after picking some specific, picking one in the back end, and you get a map with it. And this is what it looks like on the archive, which is the events calendar, right? You have like upcoming events and past events. And so that start date, that end date, that becomes critical in how we present this. I had no interest in messing with post statuses at the time, and I still don't. So it doesn't use the publish date because everything that you're creating is in the future, right? So we don't want to go messing with that. So it's a piece of metadata. It is appropriately a piece of metadata that we have set in a meta box. So we look at this, and it's like, okay, everything's fine. It's working. So what am I doing with this site? Why am I messing with it, right? 5.0 is out. His site's already updated because my husband is a very, very typical user, and I just have everything set to auto-update because he is never going to do it otherwise. Okay? So his site's already on 5.0. What's going to happen? Nothing, actually, is going to happen. He's going to go to edit his event, and it's going to look exactly the same right now until I upload my changes. Once I set show and rest to true for the events post type, it's like the only code in this talk. This is what it looks like in Gutenberg. It just works. Okay, this is not some huge scary change. Definitely, I've been dealing with shoring up plugins and fixing up things for Gutenberg for like the last couple of weeks, months, and I understand. But I think for a lot of these things, like things are fine, they're working, right? All I did was add one line to the code, 2 lines. I think I had to do something about the MetaBox backcompat mode. And it just shows up. And you know what? It still works. I tried it. jQuery date picker still works inside of Gutenberg. Doesn't it sound nuts? It works. It's fine. Everything's great. And, kudos to the team for making that happen. So yeah, this thing just works. It's fine. I don't have to go messing with it anymore. I don't have to teach my husband how to do anything new. The only thing that I want to do further maybe is like turn off comment support, because for some reason I have it on for an events post type. I wasn't thinking, I guess, and this discussion panel can't be turned off anymore, right? Like it used to be a meta box, so you could like go into your screen options and turn it off. Now I can't do that anymore, so I'm going to turn off comment support. But let's take a step back, right? This is what I want. This is what I want all of us to do. I want us all to take a step back from these things that we have and that work. It's like they're fine, right? We don't have to change anything. But I want us to take a step back, right? So let's go back to this front-end view for his website, right? First of all, we still have that friction of save and preview for your changes, right? Which also comes with its own bag of technical problems around how meta is saved against revisions. Sorry, Adam. All kinds of fun things around how you store that data, how you preview that data, right? So it comes with a bag of technical difficulties. And then you still have like that friction of like they have to go preview it in order to see what happens with that data that they've entered. So I want to think about like what can I do better to give him that kind of that better kind of outcome, right? What's the best possible UI that I can give him, while still controlling the experience a bit, giving him guidelines, giving him guideposts, and helping ensure that sort of ideal outcome. So this is what I think about when I'm looking at this again with fresh eyes. I actually wrote these out as I was writing the code. So these are like really, truly my live thoughts. So here's what I see. There's no way of verifying that this map is correct or is even going to like put the pin in the right place in the meantime, right? Like, especially in New York, like we have the zip code here, so that helps, but like there are multiple streets named the same thing, depending on the borough, depending on like, you know, you could mistype Ave and street, you know, like if you're in Queens, it's super fun. That happens to a lot of people. So there's no way of like verifying that this map is correct in the meantime, right? There might be more relevant links than just the venue. And here he's like sort of stopped thinking about what kinds of links you might want to include, like maybe to tickets, maybe to like more information about individual artists, right? There are other links that you might want to include that of course you could stick in the content area, but because you've split out venue for whatever reason, and it's not used in any sort of like grouping manner, it's not a taxonomy, you know, just kind of stops thinking about it. And most importantly, the date and time, the start date, end date, they're actually too restrictive. This show, we do need them. We need them because it controls that chronology, right, on the archive. But this particular show, there are 10 of them over the space of 2 weekends. I actually thought I was never going to be able to come to WordCamp US again because he does this every December. And we have small children, so like, you know, you go do the gig and I'll stay out of WordCamp. But I'm here. So this is an event that happens 10 times over the course of 2 weekends, right? It's nonsense to make individual events for each one. The way that his site is laid out, the way that people navigate his site, the way that we intend for people to navigate his site has nothing to do with individual events, right? It's just you have a blob, and you should be able to say, these days shows at 1, 2:30, 4:30, right? Instead of like just one start date and one end date. So now that we've thought about this in the context of his site, what kind of information actually should be on his site, what if we started thinking about blocks instead? Here's the next step that we can take. This is actual code, actual screenshot. So here I have removed some of those fields that I talked about, the map field, the venue field, and URL. And what I've added is a block template for the event post type. So when you hit add new, this is what you see right away. Okay, you can remove these blocks, whatever, but they're kind of there. They have placeholders to let you know this is what we think would look really good in these areas. I didn't write a custom map block, and I haven't gotten an API key because it seemed very annoying, so I didn't bother doing it. I'm a normal user too. But I didn't write a custom map block. I installed a plugin to give me a map block, and I think Jetpack comes with one now. So it's a super cool world that we live in, where like I don't have to write these things myself anymore. I can see what else is out there, pull that in, reference it. There's some funny things about specifying blocks in a template if they don't exist anymore, and so I need to file a bug report about that. But yeah, so what you get here is you get some paragraph blocks with placeholders in them to let you know what kind of information we think would look good there. You get your map box, and you still get your start time and end date. As I said, this is a real example, but I'm not done yet, right? I still need editor styles. I need that blue background. I need the font color, right? I need all of that stuff in there to mimic the front end of the site even better, right? So we're truly getting that visual preview, not full front end editing, but a true visual preview of what you're going to get. Another thing that I might want to do is some trickery around that start date, end date, and populate that first paragraph if it's empty, and all he does is enter stuff in the meta box instead, so he doesn't have to manually recreate that information if he doesn't need to for that particular event, right? So I might want to do some trickery around that. So for something that is relatively simple, and again, that was working just fine, I did not have to touch it, there are actually a lot of possibilities if we take a step back and we really think about what's here, what should we be doing, what helps the user, right? I'm really excited about this, actually. I'm actually excited again about this events thing that I wrote in 2011. I have a lot to learn about dealing with blocks and templates. I don't even know where to start with taking stuff out of that meta box and putting it into a paragraph block. I have no idea what's going on. I have to figure that out, right? I'm a developer and I have to learn it. But I am really excited about this richer, more flexible editing experience. And how good it feels, and what it becomes, while it's still like guiding my very handsome editor in the right direction. All right, so thinking outside the box. Metadata about a post, as I said, it's still really important, right? There's still spaces where having meta boxes that contain form fields for metadata are still important. They're still going to be necessary for certain things, right? What's important here is to take that step back, like I've been saying, and think about what is truly that metadata about a post, right? We've spent, a lot of time thinking about what is the difference between post meta and taxonomies, right? Like we've talked a bit about that. I think sometimes even still those get a little bit mixed up and conflated, and it is hard to separate them. Like what's grouping, what is descriptive, right? But you want to think about what is truly that kind of metadata, what is descriptive about the post, and what is actually content that is a component of that post, right? And we don't want to be control first, right? We want to actually be able to separate that. What is a content editing experience from what is a descriptive, metadata editing experience? So I want to take a quick look at some interesting blocks for Gutenberg. These are examples of things that maybe aren't actually quite metadata, but they do deserve visual previews, and they're really cool as blocks. So here's a super cool one from Nick Hamsey, I hope I'm saying his name right, called Guidepost. It's a table of contents block that updates live as you add headings to your post. Semantic, well-structured HTML, accessibility, right? All those things, those matter a lot, right? And so this is a super cool block. Like think about it for when you have like long documents, right? READMEs, guides, recipes, like all kinds of things can really benefit from having a proper header structure, right? And sort of a table of contents that auto-generates itself, so you don't have to do it yourself. And the fact that it live updates, that it's a block that you just insert and let it go, is super, super cool, right? No more shortcodes, no more wondering how that's going to look on the front end. You get this actual live updating preview of what's going to happen. This is something I wrote a blog post about a while back, right? Promoting my own stuff. Thinking about advertising as a first-class component of your content. The publishing industry, right, has become sort of hyper-aware of what ads mean to them, mean to their content, mean to the industry, right? And I truly believe that it's critical that we treat them as a part of how articles are shaped, how they're written, how we put them together, and what kind of content is served inside that ad space, right? You don't want an ad interrupting you just as you get to like the really good part of an article, right? You don't want that. You want the cliffhanger to be in the right spot, right? You don't want a gun ad in the middle of an article about gun violence, right? We want to be mindful about what we're serving up, how we're shaping that story for somebody. So this particular mock-up is showing pre-inserted ads. This is like the block template thing again, right? Where you open up an ad new and you've got these things already in place and you put your stuff around them. This is a pretty common paradigm where you have like a certain number of ad slots that have to be shown on a page. And you kind of want to shape your content to go around them. And that's what it allows the editor to do, right? It allows the editor to think like, maybe I want one introductory paragraph, and then the ad is like a pause of sorts, right? It's like television, right? It is a narrative. You get a pause, you get a longer bit, you get to like a really exciting part, pause, right? And then you continue. And that's something that you can think about by treating ads this way. I think as the block API continues to evolve, and you can see like how outdated these mockups are already, right? Like the UI is already different in Gutenberg. We might even be able to do something like auto-inserting ads every few blocks of a certain type, right? We don't want to insert a new ad every few, short little blocks, but every few paragraphs, every few images, something like that, right? So we might be able to auto-insert a block every once in a while based on what's come before it. And then maybe you could even move them around within certain limits, right? Like you could move it up or down one. Maybe our days of like parsing HTML in order to insert programmatic ads, maybe those could come to an end, right? It's a very unpleasant experience for developers. This is a really cool demo I saw the other day. I'm like very upset that I didn't think to do this. This is using a block. Let me see, is it gonna play? There we go. It's using a block to control background imagery with shapes and patterns. I'm going to let this play out. It's like a minute. I don't know if I should narrate it. Yeah, I don't know. It's like self-explanatory, but for people, I guess you can't see it. So there's shape control, so you can pick shapes, sizes, where it's located, and then add another shape. And so these are blocks that don't actually take up space. right? These are actually background blocks that go behind your stuff. But because they want to be able to layer shapes and patterns on top of each other, right? There are two ways that you could accomplish this, right? You insert one block and then you have like repeaters, or you insert multiple blocks with different shapes. In this case, they've chosen multiple blocks, which is pretty cool. And so you can do a shape. They've got a very lightly colored shape back there, and then patterns. And I just thought that that was a really, really cool way of thinking about something that it is descriptive about a post, right? It is metadata and probably storing it as post meta or whatever, but you get that visual, interactive way of dealing with it, and you get to see how it actually meshes with your content, right? Like maybe a triangle would look really stupid in this context. I don't know, you know? So you really get that level of control, and you can control colors, et cetera, to match your template. And all of that. And I just thought that that was a really cool way of thinking about blocks as something beyond the content, but still as an integral part of it. The final thing that I want to think about is thinking about outside of that single post preview concept, right? So this is a problem across CMSs. A lot of people have been talking about it recently. I saw somebody at Lullabot, a Drupal person, talking about it just like a couple of days ago. Which is, what do we do about previewing stuff in different contexts, right? This is what comes next. This is what that first example that I showed you from like back in 2012 was about previewing stuff outside of that single post in archives, right? What is your stuff going to look like in an archive? What is it going to look like, you know, on a homepage with a featured image versus the featured image on the individual post, right? That's the thing that we really need to think about going forward. And I think that this is what I'm excited about when I think about what has been declared as phase 2 of Gutenberg, right? We're getting into blocks now, right? They've been introduced in the editor, right? We have time to get used to it, hopefully, as like a concept of our sites, as the base of our sites. And what's coming next, and hopefully you've all heard of it, but if not, I would highly recommend looking up what's been declared as phase 2 for block-based editing, which is that it should encompass the rest of your site, right? You're going to insert blocks and control lots of things. So we already have this, widgets, menus, these are blocks, right? So we're going to take all of these disparate concepts that we have, going to unify them as blocks. And that's something that's really powerful to think about, because we now can get ahead of the curve and start thinking about things like, what if we want to preview something outside of that single post preview context, right? When we get into reusable blocks, dynamic blocks, that sort of thing, we can get into what is it like when you want to preview something outside of just the individual post context. I promised I was going to do this. I put a Cardi B quote. It is really good and healthy for our community to disagree. There's been a lot of disagreement lately, you know? But what I want to think about is focusing on getting creative again, right? Like focusing on something positive, constructive, right? Get out of litigating the process, right? It's done. I have opinions too. Whatever, it's fine. I want to move forward, and I want to really think about like what are the possibilities that this brings to us, whatever the timing might be. You know, you got to change up what you're doing. I translated this for you, for those of you who are not super into Cardi B. This is me saying embrace the change, right? You know, just stop. You know, fighting with the software. Stop fighting with the software. Think about like, what is it going to enable you to do? What is exciting about this thing that is happening? What is scary, right? It's, again, totally natural, normal to feel scared by it. It is intimidating. The JavaScript stuff, like, I don't know what's going on sometimes, you know, that's fine. We have to figure it out. We have to learn. We have to grow as developers, and hopefully we can create even better experiences. I don't want us to get stuck in continuing to want to do things the way that they always have been. I don't want us to think like, okay, my meta box works, it's fine, I'm just going to leave it alone forever, right? That's not good enough. I want us to be a better community. I want us to do better things with WordPress, right? And that's a part of how we can grow as a software project, right? Agencies, custom development, this is all a part of how the ecosystem continues to grow. And if we don't break out of that and get more creative, build better experiences, we're not going to be able to do that, no matter how much more the core software does. All right, that's it for my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Is there...
Do we have any questions for Helen? Really?
No questions for me? Everybody's afraid of me.
There we go. All right.
Hey, Helen, great talk. Thanks. So I have a question. If you could think off the top of your head of a UI example outside of the WordPress space in other apps or mobile apps or things in your everyday life that you're like, oh, I wish I could see that in WordPress.
Ooh. One thing that I've been using a lot recently for organizing my brain, basically, I still love my paper planner. I don't know how many of you are paper planner users. I'm one of those. But another thing that I've been using for sort of trying to organize my brain a little bit more, especially as I've moved countries and had children and all this stuff, there's just a lot going on. So what I've been using is an app called Notion, which is super cool. I don't think that WordPress should recreate Notion, right? I don't think anything like that. But sort of the way that this single app environment works, the way that you have a very clean preview of what's happening. It is a block-based editor, extremely explicitly block-based editor, and it made me think of Gutenberg as I started using Notion probably about a year ago. And that's something that's been really cool to me. So it doesn't have sort of the web preview context, right? It doesn't have that end of things. But as an app, it's just super interesting to think about what are blocks, how do they interact, how do I use this thing? How does my brain work? How does a tool match my brain, right? That's I think one of the things about custom development for WordPress is we're trying to match the way people think, and not everybody thinks the same way, right? So it's like teaching. Right? Sometimes you have to change up your teaching methods to match what actually works for a given student. You might have to try 17 different things for a class of 12 people, But that's how it is too with custom development, right? We really have to think about how is this particular set of users going to need things to be shaped for them in order to work for them. And I think that's what's really cool about custom development, as opposed to something like Notion where I'm trying to bend the tool to fit my brain all the time.
Someone else down here?
I don't know.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
I'm wondering, what do you see as the business or monetary benefits of better experiences that you get by not providing, just a bunch of meta boxes are?
Yeah. So I do think about this quite a bit, being in the agency space, and I've been at 10up for 7.5 years. Yeah, Jake's nodding his head. I was the first full-time employee there, so it's been a very, very long time and very involved in a lot of business and sort of things, and thinking about how do we grow as a business, in my role, right? How does open source development, something that we're not directly getting paid for necessarily most of the time, how does that still translate to business objectives, and how does it help grow our business, right? So for something like this, there are a lot of different things you can get out of it. I mean, there's the ideological, right? We just should be doing this. It makes our clients happier. They're happier to stick around. They stay on their retainers. They do new projects with us. They refer other clients to us, right? Your client relationship, I think, is really number one, and especially in the agency space, right? The way that they continue their business and can bring in new business. I think that it helps your developers just be better developers, continue to grow, right? Again, it's very easy to kind of get stuck in the same thing and never really grow as developers. And I hope that for a lot of us, that is still an exciting part of the web, right? Working in the web industry is that we do get to do new and exciting things all of the time, right? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we don't know what's going on, but that should still hopefully be an exciting part of what you're doing, and hopefully something that still appeals to a lot of us. It's not to say it's the only reason why people get into it, right? I got into web development so I'd have health insurance, very, very practical consideration. But then it turns out that this is a really exciting part of the process for me, right? It's that stuff like this where the software is constantly evolving, and I really get to sharpen my skills, and not just the development skills, but also my UX skills, my thinking skills, my business skills, my communication skills, all of that, right? I get to work on all of that stuff working in this community. And then, of course, it is a marketing advantage, right? You can go give talks in places, and you can put out white papers, and you can write blog posts and do case studies, right? Let's do all of that. That all matters, and it all does add up. Sometimes not in a directly measurable kind of way, but it's definitely important and critical to a business.
Someone right over here.
Yeah. My question is kind of about the difference between the way it's going, where you're seeing what it will look like, versus the value of, for instance, the distraction-free editor, or that separating the form, like a nice meta box, can really focus you to just pick exactly what you're talking about and not get distracted by the color, or maybe what it might look like in this particular theme when this data might live past this theme, or any of that. So I think about maybe that there is value in not seeing what you're designing yet, and Gutenberg just makes me really curious. Like, is there ever a danger in your mind of merging design and content so intimately when maybe there's value in not, or having the option to not?
Right. So this is also a part of the Gutenberg project and sort of the block-based concept at large, and what's in the 2019 theme, which I definitely encourage everybody to take a look at, which is that, we're not trying to recreate page builders in WordPress core, right? This is not a thing that core is trying to do. We're not trying to replace them. This is not like a central thing to what we're building. Instead, for the core project, what it becomes is that themes should be more prescriptive about those blocks, right? Right now, we kind of have themes that do it all, right? You have like themes that advertise themselves as like, set it up to do any number of things, and some of them include like wizards now to like do like initial setup for you. We have starter content in core. We have all kinds of stuff to support that. But really, I think themes should be more opinionated. They should be more restrictive about like what kinds of blocks can you insert, what kinds of colors can you pick from, right? They should be more restrictive about that stuff. They should be more targeted toward specific audiences, right? Where you have that curated editing experience for that one specific use case, right? It gives us a bunch of benefits. We can have better previews of themes, right? Where people can truly see a theme and understand this is a theme that's going to work for me and what I'm looking for, right? Your average person is not out there thinking, like I was talking about, I'm not going to take this theme and bend it into a thing that I want. What they're doing is they're going out and they're looking for a theme that matches what they have in their mind's eye, right? And that's what something like blocks can really enable for us, is really actually getting more restrictive about those things, but in a predictable way, I think is what's important about it being in the core software.
Hi. Sorry.
In the center.
Right over here. Hi. Sorry. So I really like how you ended the talk talking about kind of getting past the process and embracing the software and just start using it and building it. So looking forward to phase 2, what excites you the most about phase 2, and what are you looking forward to, and what are you excited to build on phase 2?
What I'm really excited about actually is the process part of it, funny enough. I'm really excited to see what UX and UI designers do with this phase 2, and Mel's looking at me like she's going to be seasick. So I think this is a huge challenge, right? Because we have this existing customizer interface that does like some parts of theme customization. Now we have like block editor in the editor. Where do those things merge? And I think that's like a super interesting UX challenge. I'm really excited to see how that goes. And the other thing that I'm really excited about that we get to have a lunchtime meeting, it's like in my calendar and everything, is about the design systems that could come out of that. And so we could have better components for reuse by custom development shops. And that's something that I've been on about for a very long time. And I'm really excited that this is a place where I really think that we can bring those things together and finally truly provide that for the community.
Okay, one more in the middle.
All right. Twin.
Hi, Twin. So with the whole idea of making the editorial experience look more like the front end in the way that it's designed and stuff, and so it's more even, do you think there'll be a time when we don't have the preview button?
That's a really good question. I think that's what this previous part about phase 2 is really going to dig into, right? Like once we have blocks encompassing the rest of your website, what happens to previewing? What is actually the line between editing mode and viewing mode, right? And I think that that's going to be a really, really cool but hard challenge to think about and to build around. And it is possible that we end up in a place where maybe it isn't like a preview button, but you kind of have view mode, edit mode, right? And that is a place that you could conceivably end up with like different screen sizes and all of that. I think we're still going to be in a place where sometimes in context, there's a preview button, right? But I think we may very well be approaching a time where the preview button isn't as much of a thing, and just like everything is a preview all the time. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be at the happiness bar after this for any further questions, like from my CEO who's been
Great.
raising his hand. So thank you very much, everybody.
Get started with our noontime session. Let me introduce to you Kyle Maurer. Wow. Obviously, he needs no introduction. Kyle strongly believes that humans are not meant to be in bubbles. He's grateful that he has found a profession and an employer which permit him a lifestyle filled with freedoms, including the ability to travel frequently and explore new pursuits. Assumption challenging and horizon broadening are among Kyle's favorite pastimes. The only conspiracy theory Kyle really and truly believes is that printers are actually artificial, intelligent, malevolent machines designed to crush our spirits. Let me introduce you to Kyle Maurer and ease of use, inflation, and WordPress.
All right. Thanks, guys. Can you hear me okay? All right. You guys ever get those really, really long support tickets? And I'm talking about the tickets where the user seems to think that you need all the details. And I'm talking about the entire backstory, like how events in their childhood led to the career path that they ultimately took, and how they one day quit their job and started this website which had technical problems, and that's not the website they're emailing you about today. We'll get to that one in about 8 paragraphs. You know, those kind of tickets where you feel like you need to put a bookmark in it halfway through. You guys ever get any of those? We get our fair share of tickets like that. Sometimes we also get tickets like this, though, which I like this ticket. There's a lot. It's pretty cool. I love the polite hi at the beginning, not wasting any time or bytes on punctuation. But my favorite thing is how weird our language is and how it allows me to imagine that the user's problem is actually with operating their comfortable clothing. But jokes about their phrasing aside, what their real message was this. And I think that's something that we can all relate to. Because usability is about expectations. Our users are not blank slates when they encounter our creations. They do have expectations. And their measure of our usability is the degree to which those expectations come true. If our thing does what they expect it to do in the way they expect it to do it, they will consider it easy to use. The problem, though, is that user expectations change. They're not constant. They are constantly changing. And they're always changing in the same direction. Users will continuously expect easier and easier experiences. And this is because their expectations are ultimately shaped by their cumulative life experiences. And thus, usability experiences an inflation-like effect. You guys know about inflation. It's that thing where you've got some money, you put it in a box, and you leave it for a few years, and you take it out of that box, and somehow it's worth less than when you put it in. The same money, just worth a little less. Well, usability is a little bit like that, in that if you create, say, an interface and then leave it untouched for an extended period of time, it will then receive lower grade on usability tests than it did when you initially created. Here's an illustration of this phenomenon which fascinates me, where you take something which is functionally unchanged, and forgive the alignment issues, something which is functionally unchanged, and just measure customer satisfaction over time. This is something that is essentially the same. The only difference is the expectations of the user, which is why in 2008, I see no cell phone service, and I think to myself, bummer, I can't make a phone call right now. But in 2018, if I see that, I'm going ballistic, because that's totally unacceptable, and I'm threatening to switch providers. There's actually an academic model for this, and it's known as the Kano model. And it describes how aspects of any offering which initially delight customers will inevitably, eventually become basic expectations. Maybe the famous 5-minute install, anybody? That is a part of WordPress, which at one time was like an exciting, competitive feature, and now not quite so much. So according to the Kano model, anything like that, any feature which is at one time exciting and competitive eventually becomes commonplace and essentially required. Here's a quick example using our own plugin. This is data meticulously gathered from our annual user surveys, which asks users why they chose and continue to use our plugin. These are write-in answers, not multiple choice. And this is the percentage of users who wrote ease of use or simplicity as all or part of their answer in response to these questions. Now, in this time period, the interface has changed very little. In fact, I would argue that it's become marginally easier to use in this time period. And still, users do not cite ease of use as frequently as they did. This illustrates that inflation effect that I was talking about, where if you don't touch it, it does, in fact, get a little harder. But a frustrating problem that we have is our tendency to make these experiences even more difficult through our own increased complexity, through the ill-advised iterations that we go through and the feature bloat that we just can't resist implementing. And if we were to compare it again to monetary inflation, we could say that taking all of your money, that creating an interface and leaving it untouched is kind of like taking all of our money and putting it into a piggy bank. And similarly, if we were to say that we create an interface and we make it increasingly complex over time, that's a lot like taking all of our money and investing it into the XFL. The pressure, though, is really on us. Tony Hoare wrote a great piece called The Emperor's Old Clothes, and I recommend reading it. And in it, he wrote this fitting quote about the usability of software relative to the natural world, which I think is worth a little reflection on. But really, as I said, we have a lot of pressure on us as software creators. Our users are surrounded daily by incredible technological innovations. And I'm talking about amazing technology like the Garmin. You know, like GPS navigation devices. They're the greatest, right? They usually get you where you need to go without that many wrong turns along the way. Except GPS navigation devices are so 10 years ago. Kind of, and this is a punchline, kind of like a lot of what we do in WordPress. And this is something I'm serious about, actually. I think we have a long way to go, folks. We're selling Garmins in an age of iPhones. And just look how quickly users can disappear. This is an example of one technology which watched its relevance and user base rapidly decline when more convenient and simpler alternatives appeared. Sometimes I think that in WordPress we feel as though users should be grateful to us because we're not making them manually configure MySQL tables. But the truth is, like, we've still got a long ways to go, and we can do a lot better. Every time we ask users to manually update and to copy and paste their license keys and to learn our pseudocode syntax and to edit PHP files and download zip files and FTP anything and to create another account, we're falling short. And on that last point, just how many username and password combos does it take to run an online operation? I don't know. It's a lot. It's too many. I can say with confidence that it's way more than any first-time WordPress user will ever expect. And I don't understand why I can navigate my life in the physical world with a modest keychain consisting of only 2 or 3 keys at most, but to run even the most basic online operation I need dozens. It frustrates me and rant. Let's go back to our products and reflect on our product roadmaps a little bit. So the question for you is, where exactly is usability on your product roadmap? usability must be a priority for every single release. We cannot afford to ever stop actively making our experiences easier and more intuitive. It's not something that you can achieve one time and then you're good to go. This is a question that I never get tired of asking. It drives me, and it also drives our team. This is our biggest challenge, but I think the one most worth our time and energy. And so as you do your own reflection on the experiences that you create, whatever you're responsible for, your themes, your plugins, your software, even the websites that you are in charge of, think about how you can make these experiences a little bit more intuitive, and the fact that it is necessary for all of us to actively do this without ceasing until the end of time. And maybe here's some brainstorming ideas. Let's just throw out a few ideas, examples of what we could do potentially to improve our experiences and make them a little bit easier. Ask yourself, are there things in our UI which are uncommonly used and we could remove from most prominent views? Do we really need our users to register for an account or create a brand new one? Do we really need to make them download the files to their computer? Do they have to manually copy and paste these keys? Do they really have to manually upload those files? Is there any task that they perform regularly which we could potentially automate for them? Is there anything we could pre-configure for them? Is there anything that we're asking them to learn when we could instead rely on knowledge they already have? I've got these and a lot of other questions on the next slide. My slides will be easy to find. You can use these just like brainstorming ideas. But for now, really, all I want is for all of us to get out there and start making things easier all together. Do you have any questions?
Well, he asked. Have a question over here. Hang on a second.
Hi, Kyle. Can you go back one slide, please? Because that's what. So there's a question on there that says, is there anything we are making users learn which could rely on knowledge they already have? Can you give us an example of that? Because that sounds like a really interesting question.
Okay, on the spot for an example, Angie. That's always fun. I've seen, product creators in WordPress, like we argue about this sort of thing a lot, and sometimes like rail on other product creators who do things like make an interface, an admin interface that doesn't match WordPress. And one could argue that that's kind of like breaking the mold a little bit, and suddenly there's different types of menus and different color schemes and different language used, and the experience is a little bit different than what the user is kind of used to. But that's I'm more looking for like functional tasks that a user must perform. For example, like if there's an editor-based experience, and in order to productively use it, the user needs to understand a unique set of technology. Like for example, shortcodes. That's something that is only in WordPress, and the syntax for it is WordPress specific. And sometimes, we might make an experience that requires a user to learn how to use specific dynamic tags, and they might need to reference our documentation to understand the syntax that we require to make these things work. And I think that there's a lot of room for us to lean a little bit more heavily on the knowledge the user already has and use like existing paradigms and so to lessen the burden on the user, instead of like just creating something new that might be more elegant and sophisticated, but still is just an additional thing for the user to learn in the same context. I think there's just room for us to improve. Does that kind of help, Angie? Do I have time for another question?
Okay, last one. We're going to keep moving here.
Thanks. My question has to do with which user you're talking about, because some of us here may be agencies, and we build sites for clients who are also users. So when you're speaking about the user experience and having to copy license keys and things like that, which might be second nature to those of us who have been doing it for a long time, are you talking about taking this to the level of, say, what Gutenberg's trying to do, which is making this more accessible to clients that we serve?
Yes, absolutely. I'm talking about the general user trying to just get something done on their own for their own individual purposes. That's absolutely what I'm talking about. And while the tone and the theme really is around like product creators, we could argue that like all of us are creating experiences in some way if we're just creating websites, if we're building them for our employer or for our clients, or if we're building websites that other people do interact with. We are creating experiences that users interact with. Users maybe have a job to do, have a mission to accomplish, have something that they want, and they are interacting with a creation of ours in order to accomplish that. And the burden is on us to make it as intuitive and simple as possible. And the point of this discussion is the fact that we need to actively continue to improve the usability over time, because the bar it moves. Anyway, you got it.
All right. Thank you,
thanks.
Kyle. All right. Next up, Nicole Passion-Taylor is coming up next with Elementary, My Dear Coder. Nicole's a designer and front-end developer for BoldGrid. She runs a website called Elementary Coders and volunteers teaching 3rd through 5th graders in her native Michigan. Nicole also speaks at WordCamps around the country and is one of the organizers for WordCamp Grand Rapids. Nicole, take it away.
So, hi, welcome to Thanks. Hi, welcome to Elementary, My Dear Coder, where we're going to be talking about teaching computer science and basic programming concepts to pre-readers and early readers. I know there's a lot of paid programs and apps out there that offer to do the same thing, but it's important to keep in mind that this type of learning can begin tonight with a single tablet, computer, or smartphone. So hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a product developer for BoldGrid, and we make themes and plugins for WordPress. I currently volunteer at my children's elementary school. That's them in the picture there with me. I work with 3rd to 5th graders at their school now, and I'm trying to get in with younger age groups soon. So the big question here is how? How can a 4-year-old child do these things? And the answer is Blockly. Blockly is a colorful drag and drop language developed by Google. It adds a visual editor which represents code as interlocking blocks. It outputs correct code in several programming languages, including JavaScript, Python, and PHP. Blockly is used by hundreds of projects, including code.org. They offer computer science fundamentals courses, and the first course has a minimum age of 4. At the end of the course, the students will create their very own game or story to share. Excuse me. Students will learn the basics of programming and collaboration techniques. This is an overview of the lesson outline. There are videos, unplugged activities, and online puzzles. The videos are the numbered diamonds, and they explain how to do an activity or puzzle and introduce new terminology and block types. The unplugged activities are offline, so they require printed course materials, scissors, glue, pencils, those sorts of things. And the numbered circles are the online puzzles. For these, the student needs to be able to drag and drop using a mouse or have an adult right there to do it for them. And they also need a basic understanding of up, down, left, and right. So this is what the puzzles look like. On the left is the play area where the program will run. In the center is the toolbox that holds the blocks you need for each program. To the right is the workspace where you drag the blocks to build your program. Above the workspace are the instructions for each puzzle. So this puzzle tells us that we need to add 1 block to the bottom to finish the code. So these puzzles have the students create simple algorithms to move a character through a maze using a single run command. The course defines an algorithm as specific instructions that explain the order in which to do something. It's a small list of steps to get a job done, like a recipe. And a program is an algorithm that has been coded into something that can be run by a machine. So this puzzle tells us to add a block to the bottom to finish the code. Each TNT block represents 1 space. So to solve it, you would drag 1 down arrow to the workspace and attach it to the bottom of the when run block. Clicking the play button starts the animation, and the character moves through the maze to follow the code. The code can be shown in JavaScript at any time by clicking the Show Code button in the upper right of the workspace. This puzzle is from Course A, which is meant for children around the kindergarten age. And this puzzle is from Course B. Course B was designed with first graders in mind. It provides more complex puzzles by assuming a limited knowledge of shapes and numbers. The same coding concepts are covered in both courses, but the puzzles are unique. So as we all know, a big part of programming is debugging. Debugging is finding and fixing errors in a program. So the first step is to find them. Most puzzles have a step button below the play space where you can evaluate one step at a time to find the problem. Ask the student what happened and what was supposed to happen. This puzzle tells us that there's an extra block at the bottom of the code. Drag it back to the toolbox to throw it away. This is also an example of the puzzle teaching the student how to play, which it does fairly often. At the top of the workspace, it shows 5 out of 4 blocks are found, meaning this puzzle is solved with a maximum of 4 blocks. The next concept taught is loops. Loops make code smaller and easier to write. They introduce the repeat block to solve the puzzles using less blocks. In earlier lessons, the repeat block sometimes showed in the toolbox, but students could solve the lesson without using it. Now they will have to use it to solve the puzzle correctly. It's the pink block at the bottom, and you can see it already has the number 5 pre-populated in it. So to solve this puzzle, you would drag out the repeat block, attach it to the when run block, and nest one right arrow inside. So this is another example of loops, and it's from Course B. So as you can see, it's a little bit harder. The repeat block has question marks in it, so the student has to come up with a number by themselves. So generally speaking, I recommend doing Course A and Course B at the same time. Complete a concept in A and then in B before moving on to the next concept. However, any lesson can be done at any time, so it's completely up to the parent or teacher how the lessons are done. You can always move on to a new concept without finishing all the lessons from the previous. The last concept taught is events. An event is an action that causes something to happen. Examples of events are pushing a button on a controller, clicking a mouse, or touching a tablet to scroll. Events let the user direct your program and change how it runs when they want or need to. And this is where students can really let their creativity shine. They create a unique story by programming cartoon characters to talk and interact with each other. The first level is a free play level, so the students get acquainted with the options available, and then later lessons have objectives based on events. So they also have a pre-reader express course, which is a combination of A and B. However, I don't recommend you use it. I think you should go through A and B completely. The only unique puzzle in the pre-reader express is this spelling bee, and it's a little bit harder because it teaches spelling in addition to the programming concepts. But the older kids do like how it looks like a word search. So the course has a curriculum guide with extended learning opportunities and lesson plans. It also includes lessons for emotional development. The video Stevie and the Big Project explains frustration and how to learn from it. Learning any new skill can be frustrating and overwhelming, especially for children. It's important to address this and any other emotional aspect needed to ensure the child's success. Remind students that failing isn't a bad thing. It's a first attempt in learning. Remind them to calm down and use logic. What is happening? What is supposed to happen? And write down what you've tried. There are also unplugged activities related to internet safety. And this teaches students the really basic, only talk to people you know, don't give out personal information, and the most important thing, which is go outside and play sometimes. So this curriculum does go up to 12th grade as well, so it's definitely a program that will grow with your child. So the next resource I have for you is called the Hour of Code. The Hour of Code provides introductory 1-hour computer science tutorials. Students in over the tutorials are available in over 45 languages, and students in 180 countries have participated. They advertise the age range as being 4 to 104, so this really is a great resource for anyone wanting to learn computer science and have fun in the process. This is the main screen where you can select your tutorial. You can filter by grade at the top and the technology used on the left. I'm going to focus on 2 of these programs that only use animation and icons for gameplay, so reading is truly not required. So the first program is Codable. Codable is a self-guided game that introduces children 5 and older to programming basics. On the left is the first level, and the goal of every level is the same: to roll the fuzzball through the maze and collect the stars. The hand is animated in the first level, showing you what to click on and drag it to the yellow boxes, and then to press the play button when you're ready to run it. So a major difference between Codable and the other lessons we've talked about here today is how the move action works. In the other lessons, they would move 1 space at a time, 1 arrow. But with this one, they'll roll to the end of the path with 1 arrow. So they also teach loops and conditions. So the slide on the right shows the loops. They have the purple repeat, or they call it the looper, but it's the equivalent of the repeat block from the code.org stuff. And then in later levels, they also introduce conditions. So if you want your fuzz to turn before the end of the path, you can absolutely do that. The next program is called CodeSpark Academy with the Foos. And this game actually has animated icons, so you can see the difference between running and jumping, for example. And just like Codable, the first level has animation showing you exactly what to click on, where to drag it to, and how to run your program. This one doesn't have a play button. You simply press your character to start the program. It also teaches loops and conditions in later levels. So these are some more direct links to Hour of Code tutorials. There should be pre-reader options at all of these, but they are updated frequently, so be sure to check. And these are all on my website. Yeah, take a picture. If you go to elementarycoders.org, there's links to these and more, so that might be easier. My last thing I have is robot turtles. So I know I said you don't have to pay for things to do this, but this is really fun and cute, and I'm going to give this away to somebody. Does anybody have like a 4 or 5-year-old and can get this game home easily? Oh, you got a girl right there. Okay. Oh, boy. Sorry. There you go. You're welcome. You're welcome. So that's that.
Do we have any questions for Nicole? I hear a question over there.
Hi, I have a quick question. I work with an elementary school. It's one of my clients, and they use Scratch. Is there any particular reason you chose Blockly? I know there are some differences, but what was the main reason you chose Blockly?
Sure. So Scratch is actually meant for older kids, and it's a little bit more complicated. The learning curve is greater because, yeah, there's more block types in there, and it's just more complicated. So I think starting off with these pre-reader ones and then working into the Scratch would be a good way to go. Yeah.
Question in the middle there.
I was wondering about when you lead like an hour of code for a class, like how many teachers or helpers do you need kind of per students to get a good outcome?
Sure. Well, when I go in, it's just me and the actual teacher in the classroom, and we just do the best we can. A lot of the games are self-guided, so it really does teach the student how to play, so they can do a lot of it by themselves. Like, I put my 5-year-old in front of Codable, and she made it to like world 2.5 or something before she asked for help. So they really do a good job of teaching the student how to play.
Another question in the middle.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a 2-year-old.
Okay.
She's pretty little.
Yeah.
And these are obviously computer games and techniques for teaching kids that are kindergarten and up.
Right.
Do you have any, obviously you have kids and they were once 2 years old.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions for teaching these concepts to little kids, or at what point did you start that?
I started my son around 4, which is the minimum age for a lot of these programs. But it's really just going to depend on the child. Like, if they understand up, down, left, and right and can point you in the right direction, I mean, you can do the drag and drop for them. But yeah, everything I've seen basically has a minimum age of 4.
Question on the left.
Okay, so I'm super excited to hear you talk about this. We did this in 2nd grade with my daughter's class. Like, they were going to computer class, but they weren't really doing anything because the teacher was not a computer teacher.
Right.
So we said, we'll just come in and do code.org with them.
Right.
And it was amazing, like brilliant, fantastic, loved it. But how would we, if as parents or as developers, how do you suggest we work with public schools specifically to go in and say, you know what, we'll come, we'll teach. You have the computers, or we'll help find the computers. Like, we want to serve you, but how do we help work with administrators who may not be, they might not even be allowed to let other people come in and do that. Like our teacher, she just kind of did it because she was, real loose like that.
Okay, yeah, so I think the best way to get into the schools is to look through the curriculum guide and see if you can match up any of the stuff, because that would be a really easy pitch. Like, yes, this program fills this requirement, I'm volunteering to come in, just let me do it. The way I got in was through the Hour of Code. I volunteer, they have what they call Fun Fridays, so that's what I do for that. And then because it went over so well last year, I'm trying to get like an after-school club going. So if you can't get it going on school time, try the after-school thing, and then once they see that students are excited and that it's working and they're learning, they might be able to let you come into the classrooms more then too.
Last question in the back.
Have you tried any non-screen, non-digital STEM toys like, these days I saw Botley for teaching programming. Have you tried anything like that? Does it help?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Have you tried
hardware toys?
Any non-screen,
non-digital? Oh, the offline, yes.
Like,
so that course
Botley?
has unplugged activities, as they call it.
Yeah.
So you print and actually cut out the arrows as opposed to dragging and dropping them on the computer. So they'll end up with little cards that they move around to build their program that way. Or you have physical students lining up and they talk and they tell you how to move. You have to move how they tell you to. So that code.org curriculum has a really good number of unplugged activities.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
It's lunchtime as you exit the room. Just a couple notes for you. T-shirt and swag pickup by 3 o'clock in the back of the hallway track. Get there by 3 if you want to exchange a shirt. And then WordPress Gear Store will be closing at 4 p.m. Get there early to purchase official WordPress items. And last but not least, if you're missing your cell phone, check. If you're missing your cell phone, check at Lost and Found. Thank you for coming, everybody.